On May 16, 2025, an EF3 tornado touched down in the heart of St. Louis, strafing thousands of homes and trees from mansions in eastern St. Louis County through the famous 1,300-acre Forest Park and into the impoverished historic western edge of North St. Louis City, resulting in the first tornado-related deaths within the city limits in 2/3 of a century. As I write this on the 20th of May, 2025, 4 days into the disaster, the situation is still unfolding and critical, complete with continuing outages and outrages as official finger-pointing has begun. We're traveling north on Kings Highway Boulevard in the central West End towards Fountain Park, one of the hardest hit spots just north of the infamous Delmar Boulevard border. Through the coping-controlled chaos of navigating endless dead traffic light intersections, people get on cooperatively in a surreal landscape after routine life is unexpectedly jolted away from them. The footage in this video isn't the most dramatic, or by now even current, but takes a look at just a small portion of the area affected roughly 24 hours after the destructive storm tore through, capturing and presenting a simple, authentic moment. Standing on the west side of North Kings Highway, the parking lot for the Aldi's located on the northeast corner is completely commandeered as a staging area for all manner of emergency and city service vehicles. Notice the generator-powered mobile communications tower probably providing emergency cellular service for the area. I essentially kept a respectful distance out of people's way as much as possible, so first I thought to look at some temporarily being ignored down trees and bricks, before a brief drive through Fountain Park and a bit down Page Avenue with more dramatic carnage upcoming. Unintentionally, this video illustrates the Delmar Divide phenomenon a little bit as we walk south of the hotly debated line on the map among expensive, century-old buildings and houses in neighborhoods that stand in stark contrast to scenes of the crumbling and evaporating neighborhood, once of nearly as much historical opulence, just a mere 6 blocks to the north. The opposing sides of Delmar Boulevard isn't a perfectly sharp line, of course. Both have examples of glory and despair, and a prime example is coming up in a minute or so. This was an old car repair shop that was here for quite a long time and closed only within the last couple of years. Since I'm here, I have to take a good look at this crying shame of an amazing old church that I've never really noticed before, partly because it looked nice and intact up until only very recently. I've driven past it 1,000 times, but it's not wise to gawk at architecture when you're steering a vehicle in the arcade game that is driving on Kings Highway. My quick and casual internet research after filming this tells me this was one of 3 churches built in close proximity to each other, eventually known as the Holy Corners. All built between 1902 and 1908, this particular one was for the Second Baptist Church in 1907, who moved their congregation out to the county in 1955. Whoever occupied it for the next 50 years is unclear to me, but it was supposedly abandoned in 2006, just 1 year short of a century of service. For the last 20 years or so, it's changed hands between multiple investment developers with various plans that haven't happened yet. It's for sale for $3 million as it has been for years now, as inevitable vandalism and theft essentially cancel out any market appreciation, both of which have really accelerated in just the last couple of years. It's supposedly historically landmark protected, but I don't like the look of this blown down fence. I'm not sure which of these windows were already broken before and after the storm, but the tornadic conditions certainly didn't improve this irreplaceable structure. With the ivy taking over in a rather beautiful way, it looks like an isolated and forgotten relic from an ancient civilization, yet stands just a few feet from thousands of passing people-piloted projectiles, unconcerned of its history and significance. Welcome to St. Louis, I guess. Back on the road, here is my very brief drive-through of the Fountain Park area. Again, only a small portion of the destruction. Traveling east on N right behind the emergency staging lot, the streets of Albert and Euclid to the left are clogged with people, vehicles, and debris. I didn't catch them in video because there was just so much activity and people everywhere you looked. I didn't want to look too obnoxious. However, Bayard Avenue is relatively clear, so I took that north, which leads us to the eastern end of Fountain Park. I could have done a much better job filming, and acquired hours and hours of carnage footage from all over the area. As a self-purported St. Louis documentarian, I felt the need to make some record of my own of this event, but in the circumstances that came with it, this wouldn't have been very helpful, and I'm never happy feeling like I'm in the way. I'm not so much needed to help cover the most documented tornado in St. Louis history, as there were loads of shutterbugs of every caliber and authority. And here I found myself just another tourist. So I came, I saw, I filmed, and roached out. As we survey the damage in the vicinity of the Fountain Park from an angle or two, and then up Kings Highway a little more and east on Page Avenue, I want to say that I have a soft spot in my heart for North St. Louis, and just a hopeless and powerless sad soul vicariously feeling its pain as an unaffected outsider looking in, rooting for an underdog as my video back catalog shows. With the utmost condolences for the victims and their loved ones first, this was about the biggest single punch in the gut for the preservation of architecture in North St. Louis City on record, and we all know we'll be lucky if even 25% of what was hit survives. Some have very strong opinions one way or another about cultural differences and juxtapositionally socio-economic viewpoints, and who should be blamed for the decline of St. Louis, specifically North St. Louis. I suppose I do as well, but I think there is loads of it to go around and a complicated recipe of choices and interests of a great many people going on unresolved for decades and decades. But I want to step away from the headlines for a moment and offer my broader sentimental video artist observations of the encompassing situation. To look at our media on the internet, it would be easy for an intergalactic visitor to assume us humans only fight, fail, and screw each other over and over, endlessly. Everyone has been given countless reasons to resent everyone else, lecturing and lamenting the actions or lack thereof of others without consideration of living in their shoes. This and other unfortunate side effects of human nature dominates the narrative on the surface because our survival instinct draws us to be wary and prepared for the negative as a defense. And so our distance-broad communication with one another becomes a potently distilled concentration of everything wrong. Back when news would take days to spread, we had far less fodder to rile up our worries and fears, whereas today one must manage to keep breathing with the constant psychological beer bong flow of media gushing into our faces, with more tragedy and things to get offended about than can possibly be consumed. In contrast to that is the real world, where most of the time the productive, cooperative, and civilized parts of human nature prevail routinely. There is no market for news of calm normalcy, or praise of routine competency, or empathy for the challenges faced by chosen officials and leaders who, like us, are only human, doing their best to cope with their perceived responsibilities, whether they are any good at performing them or not. There will always be a dissent of contentment from somebody, to simply be contrarian if for no other logical valid reason, so I think it's healthy to always try to look at the big picture's pros and cons with restraint before locking in some immovable opinion. And even then, you should leave yourself a 1% out of open-minded willingness to have your mind changed or admit you don't even know enough to have a dog in the fight. It's kind of an odd popular expression if you stop to think about it for a minute, isn't it? But here in this small select scene of suffering citizens, what I also saw was the wholesome camaraderie of a community coming together to help each other through a tough time that unavoidably affects everybody around to some degree. Some things like tornadoes simply cannot be expected to be controllable or preventable. This tornado had no discretionary care or concern of any of our human problems when it hit valuable real estate in affluent areas, our public epicenters of heritage and culture, or abandoned, neglected buildings in old blighted neighborhoods. But its effects on any humans in or responsible for any of these places still have the universal core to pick up the pieces and pick up our lives after the losses as best as possible. In this area where money and resources is more limited than others nearby, proactivity and kinship surpasses expectations suggested by the predominant narratives of the news and toxic social media posts from surprisingly not always as anonymous as you would think keyboard warriors who endlessly push at us and vie for personal attention and money. While this video doesn't do a very good job showing this, being there in person briefly, I saw loads of first responders standing by and doing their jobs, the electric company actively going about their business repairing damages to restore the power, and loads of residents mingling with both familiar and possibly usually distant neighbors alike, still standing bewildered by dramatic life-changing plans that exceed the buzzkill of having a good relaxing weekend with all four of your walls intact. Despite all the generalized racial rhetoric American media seems obsessed with espousing for some reason these days, in my witness in this place and time at least I couldn't see it, as these particular streets predominantly inhabited by a group of Americans who happen to be of African ancestral lineage, willfully and peacefully associate with fellow Americans derived of other races and cultures in what appeared to be an atmosphere of a forced de facto block party holiday nobody had on their calendar. Without the modern normalcy of having near constant reliable electricity from the grid as we've become accustomed to, if not psychologically dependent on, the people here are getting out their chainsaws to clear away fallen branches from their neighbor's yard, sealing up damaged homes and buildings, sharing their food and resources with each other as they barbecue and network about how to handle the disaster. Anyway, that's all I really got, so now I'm gonna go make some irrelevant video about the closing of a 75-year-old local grocery store that no longer exists, or something like that. Thank you for watching.